There is something about Seattle in the 1970s that people who lived through it will never forget. The Boeing bust, the rain, the rise of something special that the rest of the country did not yet see coming. This was a city that almost died and then reinvented itself. Boeing laid off over 60,000 workers. A famous billboard near the airport asked if the last person leaving Seattle would turn out the lights. But something remarkable happened. Instead of fading away, Seattle planted the seeds of what would become a tech revolution. By the end of the decade, two kids from Lakeside School, Bill Gates and Paul Allen, had founded Microsoft and were coming home. This was the decade that gave us Starbucks, the Kingdom, the Seahawks, the Mariners, and an NBA championship. The hippie era was ending, but Seattle was quietly inventing what came next. Let us walk through what daily life actually felt like during that transformative decade. Some of this might bring back memories. Some of it reveals how a city that nearly collapsed became the foundation for the future. Let us step into that world. Living in Seattle in the 1970s meant living under gray skies for much of the year. The rain defined daily life. People did not carry umbrellas because real Seattleites considered that a sign of weakness. Instead, they wore rain jackets and simply accepted the drizzle as part of existence. The moisture was constant, but rarely heavy. It was a light mist that got into everything. Homes in Seattle reflected the climate. Wood was everywhere. Cedar siding on houses, wood paneling inside. The Pacific Northwest had forests, and people built with what they had. Homes had that distinctive 1970s look, with harvest gold appliances, avocado green fixtures, and shag carpeting. The interiors were cozy and designed for spending time inside during the long, rainy months. Fireplaces were common and necessary. The neighborhoods had distinct characters. Capitol Hill was becoming bohemian. Ballard was still heavily Scandinavian, with bakeries selling Lefse and Lutefisk. The University District surrounded the University of Washington campus. West Seattle offered views of downtown across Elliott Bay. The Central District was the heart of Seattle's African-American community, the same neighborhood where Jimi Hendrix grew up before leaving to become a legend. The decade began with trauma. Seattle, at the start of the 1970s, was a city in crisis. Boeing, the company that had defined Seattle's economy for decades, was collapsing. Employment at Boeing dropped from over 100,000 workers in 1967 to barely 38,000 by April 1971. The ripple effects devastated everything. Housing prices fell. Businesses closed. Restaurants sat empty. The unemployment rate soared. Food banks, which had been rare in Seattle, became common as families struggled to survive. The suicide rate climbed. The birth rate fell. In April 1971, two realtors named Bob McDonald and Jim Youngren put up a billboard near SeaTac Airport that said, "Will the last person leaving Seattle turn out the lights?" They meant it as dark humor, a way to push back against the doom and gloom portrayed in national media. But few people laughed. The billboard became a symbol of the era, an image that would haunt Seattle for years. The Boeing bust was the longest and deepest recession Seattle had faced since the Great Depression. The economic desperation forced something important. Seattle could no longer depend on a single employer. The city had to diversify or die. Before we continue with how Seattle rebuilt itself and the cultural moments that defined the decade, if you're enjoying this look back at how people really lived and want to explore more decades and places, consider subscribing. There are so many more stories about how Americans built the life we know today. One of the most important events of the decade happened in November 1971. Seattle voters had to decide the fate of Pike Place Market. Developers and city officials wanted to tear down the aging market and replace it with modern high-rises, hotels, and parking garages. They called their plan Pike Plaza. Architect Victor Steinbrueck and a group called Friends of the Market fought to preserve the historic farmers market that had operated since 1907. They gathered over 25,000 signatures in 3 weeks to put the issue on the ballot. On Election Day, Seattle voters chose preservation over development by a margin of nearly 2-1. The victory created a 7-acre historic district and established a commission to protect the market's character. That same year, the first Starbucks opened near Pike Place Market. 3 friends named Jerry Baldwin, Zev Siegel, and Gordon Bowker opened a small store selling roasted coffee beans, tea, and spices. They named it after the first mate in Moby Dick. The store was tiny, just 1,000 square feet, staffed by a single employee. They sold beans for people to take home and brew themselves, not the coffee drinks that would come later. Nobody could have imagined that this modest shop would grow into a global empire. The decade also began with loss. On September 18, 1970, Jimi Hendrix died in London at age 27. 2 weeks later, on October 1st, Seattle buried its greatest musical son. The funeral was held at Dunlap Baptist Church in the Rainier Valley. The Hendrix family requested a private service. Media and fans gathered outside, but stayed respectfully behind rope barriers. Inside, a family friend sang spirituals, while another read the lyrics to Jimi's song Angel as the eulogy. Miles Davis attended. So did members of the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Hendrix was laid to rest in Greenwood Cemetery in nearby Renton, next to his mother. Seattle had produced one of the greatest guitarists in history, and now he was home for good. The city would spend decades figuring out how to honor him properly. Sports transformed Seattle during the 1970s. The Kingdome opened in 1976 after years of planning and construction. The massive concrete dome, officially the King County Stadium, gave Seattle a venue capable of hosting major league sports. Before the Kingdom, Seattle had struggled to attract professional teams. Now everything changed. The Seattle Seahawks played their first game on August 1st, 1976, a preseason contest against San Francisco in the new dome. More than 60,000 fans showed up. The Seahawks brought FL football to the Pacific Northwest for the first time. The following spring, the Seattle Mariners played their first game, bringing Major League Baseball to the city. Seattle finally had the sports teams that other major cities took for granted. The Supersonics had arrived earlier, but the late 1970s brought them glory. The team made it to the NBA Finals in 1978, losing to the Washington Bullets in 7 games. They came back the next year determined to finish the job. Led by Gus Williams, Dennis Johnson, and Jack Sikma, the Sonics won their first and only NBA championship in June 1979, defeating the Bullets 4-1. The celebration in Seattle was enormous. Game 4 of the 1978 finals had drawn nearly 40,000 fans to the Kingdom, the largest crowd ever to watch a professional basketball game at that time. Seattle proved it could support championship-caliber teams. Music in Seattle in the 1970s was quietly building toward something. The grunge explosion was still 2 decades away, but the foundations were being laid. Heart, the rock band led by sisters Ann and Nancy Wilson, emerged from Seattle in the mid-1970s. Their debut album, Dreamboat Annie, released in 1976, went multi-platinum. Songs like Crazy on You and Magic Man established Seattle as capable of producing national rock acts. Local venues hosted touring acts and developed homegrown talent. The Paramount Theater downtown brought in major performers. Bumbershoot, the arts festival at Seattle Center, launched in 1971 as the Mayor's Festival. It started with a budget of just $25,000 and it attracted 125,000 people to its first 3-day run. By 1973, it had been renamed Bumbershoot, a British slang term for umbrella that seemed fitting for the rainy city. The festival became a Labor Day weekend tradition, showcasing music, art, comedy, and performance of every kind. The seeds of the tech industry were planted during the 1970s. Bill Gates and Paul Allen grew up in Seattle, meeting at the elite Lakeside School where they bonded over a shared obsession with computers. In 1975, they founded Microsoft in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to be near their first customer. But the two Seattle natives always planned to return home. In January 1979, Microsoft moved to Bellevue, just across Lake Washington from Seattle. The company had fewer than 15 employees at the time. Nobody except perhaps Gates and Allen could have imagined what was coming. Seattle was about to become the center of a technological revolution that would transform the world. Daily life in the 1970s in Seattle moved at a different pace. Traffic existed, but was manageable. The freeways, Interstate 5 running north to south and Interstate 90 heading east across Lake Washington, were relatively new and not yet clogged with the congestion that would come later. The floating bridges across Lake Washington connected Seattle to the suburbs on the east side. Getting around was still reasonable. Shopping meant going downtown or to emerging suburban malls. Nordstrom, still a regional department store, had its flagship location downtown. Frederick and Nelson was another beloved department store. The University District had eclectic shops near campus. Pike Place Market, saved from the wrecking ball, offered fresh fish, produce, and crafts. Food in Seattle reflected both its maritime location and its immigrant populations. Fresh salmon, Dungeness crab, and oysters from Puget Sound were everyday staples. The Japanese-American community, which had been devastated by internment during World War II, was rebuilding in the International District. Chinese restaurants clustered there as well. Dick's Drive-In, a local burger chain, had been serving Seattle since the 1950s and remained a beloved institution. Seafood was exceptional because it was local and fresh. People took for granted what other cities would consider luxury. The environmental movement found fertile ground in Seattle. The city's proximity to stunning natural beauty made residents protective of their surroundings. Mount Rainier dominated the southern horizon on clear days. The Cascade Mountains rose to the east. Puget Sound brought the ocean to the city's doorstep. Discovery Park opened in 1973 on the site of a former military installation, giving Seattle its largest city park. Gasworks Park, a former gasification plant on Lake Union, was transformed into public space when it opened in 1975. The cleanup and conversion represented a new approach to industrial sites, preserving the old machinery as sculptural elements rather than demolishing everything. The Burke-Gilman Trail opened its first section in 1978, converting an abandoned rail corridor into a path for cyclists and pedestrians. These projects reflected Seattle's emerging identity as a city that valued green space and alternative transportation. What defined Seattle in the 1970s was transformation through crisis. The Boeing bust forced the city to look beyond a single industry. The fight over Pike Place Market showed that citizens could preserve what mattered against powerful interests. The arrival of professional sports gave the city pride and identity. The quiet founding of companies like Starbucks and Microsoft planted seeds that would grow into global institutions. The decade had its darkness, the economic collapse at the beginning, the struggles of working families who lost everything when Boeing cut jobs, the rain that never seemed to stop. But there was also resilience. Seattle did not die when Boeing fell. The city adapted, diversified, and began building something new. For those who lived in Seattle during the 1970s, the memories are specific. The sound of foghorns from Elliott Bay, the smell of fresh coffee from that little store near the market, the excitement of finally having major league teams, the relief when Boeing started hiring again by mid-decade, the pride when the Sonics brought home a championship. Seattle was not yet the tech hub it would become. It was not yet the coffee capital. It was not yet the home of Amazon and grunge music and everything that would put it on the global map. But all of those things were taking root. The 1970s were when Seattle stopped being just another Northwest city and started becoming something more. For those with memories of this remarkable era in the Emerald City, there is always more history to explore.